Race cars are never too fast. When the RS was introduced and then the RSR was introduced, that really set the format. It really dominated. Porsche has always been a company very astute at supplying cars that customers could buy and race successfully without having huge costs of racing that car.
I've been a Porsche enthusiast since the early 60s. And if I think about the history of Porsche, the most important car in the life of Porsche would be the RS. This car, this homologation special, was the genesis for the RSR, the 934, 934.5, and 935. The Porsche factory was run by the Piëch family and the Porsche family. And Ferdinand Porsche, the elder, the founder, had a son and a daughter, and his daughter married into the Piëch family, and his son, Ferry Porsche, was the Porsche family. Piëch was very much into racing and technology. They developed some of the greatest prototypes of all time. The first real prototype was the 910, and he wanted to use all the latest and greatest Formula One technology. Formula One had developed wheels and tires, and he wanted to take advantage of all that. So he developed the 910. Still a 2-liter car with a basic 911 engine in it, but the car you're looking at here finished in the top 10 and won its category in 1969 and Le Mans. And the last great prototype of the 70s was the 91730. But in the early 70s, the Porsche and the Piëch families decided they were going to go from family management to outside management. So they brought in Dr. Furman, who had been with Porsche for quite some time, very highly respected gentleman, and he was now the head of Porsche. And he really wanted to develop cars that people would recognize, that win on Sunday, sell on Monday, which is a working concept. And the first real example of this was the RS Porsche.
You know, the RS format was developed in 1972, not race cars, but street cars. And that was, from a performance standpoint, the car to have. That was a very well-respected car that everybody wanted to have.
Everybody wants an RS in their stable. And the RS was basically a 1 year only. It was really built in 72 and 73. They needed to build 500 of these. They were not available in the United States, but instead of 500, it was greeted with such enthusiasm that they sold 1,500. And of the 1,500, 1,300 were road cars, basically touring cars, and 200 of them were lightweights. There were 17 homologation cars. And those were the cars that were submitted to the FIA that Porsche used to homologate and was basically the standard from which they would build the RSR, the 934 and the 935. So it all really started with the RS. The car which we have here in the garage is an RSH, which is one of the 17 homologation cars. And it's really lighter than a lightweight, no glove box, no badge on the front. And Porsche came out in January, and their first competition in the US was in Daytona. And the Penske family and Mark Donohue did a lot of developing in preparation of the RSR for Daytona. So in the US, it was basically Penske and Brumos that were the factory teams, so to speak. And in 1973, the Brumos, the famous Brumos Number 59, won first overall at Daytona. And there's a fun story that's been told.
And in typical fashion, when we got the car, Peter went through it and disassembled everything to make sure that everything was perfect. And he found that the flywheel bolts were not tight. And he called up Roger Penske, and Roger thought he was just, messing with him. And that's, sure enough, that's the thing that took them out of the race. So by that time we were in the sort of the survival mode with the RS. But that was a great car to drive because it had really good power, it had really good brakes, all the underpinnings of the car were all from the RSR, so it was a really, really nice handling car. And because it didn't have a lot of aerodynamic drag to it, it was very fast down the straight line. So it was nice to drive, and we were really enthusiastic about that car, and it was a great car. So after the race was over, Porsche wanted the car to come back to Weissach so they could retest it to make sure everything was okay with that car. And unfortunately, it was crashed fairly badly, and that's why we ended up with a yellow car for the 12 Hours of Sebring. And we were lucky enough to, Peter and myself, to win that race. So those two races back to back were really special.
The Porsche livery of '59 came from Peter Gregg's naval intelligence days. Peter Gregg was stationed on the USS Forrestal, which was an aircraft carrier. And if you ever see an overall shot of an aircraft carrier, the Forrestal's number was 59. And the number on Peter Gregg's cars were always 59. And it's the same typeface and font that was on the Forrestal. So that's the genesis of the 59 for Peter Gregg. He was also a patriot, and he liked the red, white, and blue colors. So that's why all the Brumos cars were white with red and blue stripes, number 59. Those that were driven by Peter Gregg.
Peter Gregg was a great mentor. He was a great teacher. I was driving with him, one of the best drivers in the world. I was driving for a team that was really wonderful, the Brumos team. And, it just everything, the stars all lined up, and everything was, really good. We won Daytona, the overall, with an RS, which was amazing. And that race and the next race, which was the 12 Hours of Sebring, sort of set the stage for my whole entire career.
In the US, the main series was Trans Am. And that also emphasized the win on Sunday, sell on Monday, because they were racing Mustangs and Camaros and Corvettes that you could drive on the street. So you felt like you were, driving a race car, so to speak, but it was the fact that those cars raced in the All-American Series, the Trans Am, echoed that win on Sunday, sell on Monday, which was a very important mantra. So Porsche decided they were going to contest in Trans Am. So they built this car. This is one of one. It's a unicorn. It was built for Peter Gregg and Hurley Haywood to contest Trans Am. Again, with the idea of win on Sunday, sell on Monday. So now they weren't driving a 917, they were driving a 911 RS. And this particular car won overall in the series of Trans Am and IMSA in '73. So mission accomplished by Porsche. Back in Europe, there were three great races: the Mille Miglia, Targa Florio, and Le Mans. The Mille Miglia ended in the 50s, tragically, so it left the Targa Florio and Le Mans. So Porsche decided they were going to build a car that could compete in the Targa Florio and Le Mans. In 1973, Porsche won the Targa Florio with an RSR. And the early RSRs were called R models. They were basically prototypes. There was R1, 2, 3, 4. It went up to R8. So they produced a prototype for the Targa Florio, which exists today. So of the prototype R models, there might be 4 or 5 of them that exist today. They would be the rare martini cars, so to speak. And now comes Le Mans. And obviously they're not going to win overall Le Mans because you have the prototypes. So Porsche decided that they were going to contest Le Mans with an RSR. And the car right here by me is R7, which was the prototype that Porsche took to Le Mans. They expected to run these in the RSR class, but they'd already delivered RSRs to the Kremer team and Luce and some of the other big Porsche customers, and they protested the fact that Porsche wanted to enter this car as an RSR. It was so vastly different than their RSRs. It had what's called the Mary Stuart tail. It had knockoff, pin drive wheels. A lot of experimental prototype details were on this car. So under protest, Porsche ran this as a prototype, grand touring car, driven by their two top factory drivers, Gijs von Lennep and Herbert Muller. They were the front-running prototype drivers. They had just won the Targa Florio, and now they were going to contest at Le Mans. So they drove this car at Le Mans to a 4th place finish overall, which is astounding. They were only a few laps right behind the Matra. So it was an amazing event. And this past year, we had this car at Rennsport Reunion, which is a big Porsche reunion, and we were fortunate enough to meet Gijs von Lennep. Sadly, Muller had passed away. And so Gijs was telling us how it was racing this car at Le Mans, which was memorable. And he came up to me and he said, normally when I drove a Porsche, they'd tell me to watch my shifts and watch the red line, and it's a long race, and preserve the car. When we got to Le Mans in '73, Porsche was so upset that this was not going to run in the RSR class that they told Herbert and I to run as fast as we could. Don't mind the tachometer, don't worry about the shifts, just go as fast as you can. Don't worry about preserving the car. So that was like music to a racer's ear, and they went off and they ran this car so hard. And this car has some very unusual features. Aside from the pin drive wheels, it has what's called a Mary Stuart tail. As far as I know, there were 3 Mary Stuart cars. One of them was kind of a put-together Mary Stuart for the Targa Florio, and that car is restored and exists today. And the other one was car number 47, which had the Mary Stuart tail, and this had the 46. And why it's called the Mary Stuart tail is because Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots, always wore starch collars. So if you look at the spoiler on this car, it very much looks like a starch collar, and they call this a Mary Stuart tail. So this was different. The car had 917 wheels on it. It had 3 liters, well over 300 horsepower. So there was a reason that the other RSR teams protested this car. As I look at the whole run in the history of Porsche, I look at what car are the enthusiasts trying to replicate? What car resonates the most with them? They've all taken cues from the RS and the RSR. It's just been pivotal. I think that has to be the most loved car of all time, because people are backdating Porsche so they look like RSs and RSRs. And I think that really tells the story, how loved that car was. And then the race record at Le Mans, at the Targa Florio, winning the Trans Am Championship, winning IMSA, that speaks volumes as to the importance of the RS. I think the ultimate expression of the RS has to be the 935 Porsche that won overall at Le Mans. This car was competing against the Works 936s with Jackie Eakes and Hurley Haywood and all the great drivers. And this car won first overall at Le Mans. Again, a victory for an RS as far as I'm concerned, because if you peel back the bodywork, there is an RS underneath here. And it's a flat Boxer 6, air-cooled, and it all really came from the RS.
Well, the RS and then the RSR were instrumental in the development of the 911. The donor of all those models was the RS. So the RS was a very important car. They're like the holy grail for the Porsche collector, that whole line of cars.
Almost, including myself, we were all looking at muscle cars and high-performance V8s. And I remember reading about Porsches and their winning ways, and I started doing a little homework, and friends of mine were all looking at muscle cars, and I came up with this Porsche idea, and none of them had even thought about it. And what really drove me there was the fact that they were winning races. And, you know, being a fan of sports car racing in its early days, Porsche, the Spyders, you know, they were the winning cars, and I wanted to be on the winning team. Still am.